Phones in Japan are different, and I'm not talking about brands, function, look, or feel. Everyone uses iPhone or Samsung just like any other country. However, something that makes the phones in Japan different to everywhere else is not what you may expect. And the reason as to why they're different is quite disturbing. So, you want to take a photo, you pull out your phone, switch it to silent the way you always do. Later that day, you take a picture with that phone, and it makes the loudest noise you've ever heard in your life. Not a quiet click, not a subtle sound. A full, loud, unmistakable camera shutter broadcast to every single person within 20 feet of you. In a quiet temple, in a museum, in a crowded train where you are the only foreigner and every head has just turned to look at you. Silent mode is definitely on. You search through every menu you can find. There's no way to turn it off. You Google it, and that's when you discover the truth. Every phone sold in Japan, by every manufacturer, on every network, makes that sound. And it cannot be disabled. Not by you, not by anyone, not for any reason. But here's the thing, it's not a law. There is no legislation, no government decree, no regulation that mandates it. It's a voluntary agreement between phone manufacturers, a quiet industry-wide decision made in a boardroom in the early 2000s. And the reason they made that decision is one of the darkest, most uncomfortable stories in modern Japanese society. This is why every phone in Japan makes that sound. To understand why the shutter sound exists, you need to understand the scale of a problem that Japan was already dealing with long before smartphones arrived, and that the arrival of the camera phone threatened to make catastrophically worse. Japan has a long and deeply troubling history with shikan, a word that broadly translates to groping or other acts of that nature, but which encompasses a range of predatory behavior that's been documented and persistent problem on Japan's famously crowded public transport for decades. Packed commuter trains, where passengers are pressed together with no space between them, created conditions that predators exploited systematically. Women and girls, disproportionately targeted, faced harassment so regularly that some rail operators introduced women-only carriages. The problem was serious, widespread, and deeply shameful for a society that places enormous value on public safety and order. Voyeuristic photography was the natural and horrifying extension of this once miniaturized cameras became affordable and accessible. Before phones had cameras, hidden cameras required equipment, planning and some effort and risk of discovery. A camera phone changed all of that. Suddenly every person on a crowded train was potentially carrying a device that could take a photograph in complete silence at any angle without any visible indication that a picture had been taken at all. The trigger for the shutter sound decision was a single incident in the year 2000. A Japanese celebrity named Masashi Tashiro, who had been a prominent member of a well-known music group, was arrested for secretly photographing women in public. The case was highly profile, widely covered, and deeply alarming to an industry just beginning to ship phones with built-in cameras. Kaiji Takao, who was involved in the development of early camera phone technology at the time, later said publicly that the incident had a direct and immediate impact on what happened next. The fear was that camera phones would gain a reputation as voyeurism devices, and that reputation would damage the entire industry. The decision made in response was swift. Even when a phone is set to silent mode, every other notification and alerts completely suppressed, the camera shutter would still make a loud, clear, unmistakable sound. Every manufacturer adopted the same standard, not a law, a voluntary commitment, but so universally adopted that for every practical purpose, it functions like one. Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, because there is a twist in this rule that most people who encounter it for the first time do not realize. It's not actually a law. This is probably the most widely misunderstood fact about the shutter sound in Japan. Every article, every travel blog, every Reddit post written by a confused tourist says the same thing. It's illegal to disable the camera sound in Japan. It is the law. You will get in trouble. That is simply not accurate. There is no national law in Japan that mandates the camera shutter sound. None. The Law Library of Congress has confirmed it. Multiple Japanese legal commentators have confirmed it. What exists instead is a private industry agreement between Japan's major phone manufacturers and carriers. They agreed among themselves that phones sold in Japan would include a mandatory, non-disableable shutter sound. This agreement is not legally enforceable by the government. It is a self-regulatory standard, and it applies specifically to phones sold through Japanese carriers in Japan. Why does this distinction matter? Because it means the rule has significant gaps. A phone purchased outside Japan does not carry this restriction. It was not sold under the Japanese industry agreement. Its camera can be completely silent. Bring that phone to Japan and you're taking soundless photographs in a country where soundless photography is considered deeply antisocial at best and predatory at worst. And you're doing so entirely legally. There is also the reverse problem. Japanese residents who travel abroad find their phone still makes that sound in countries where silent photography is perfectly normal, announcing every photograph in galleries, restaurants, and museums because their device is still operating under rules designed for a Tokyo commuter train. To understand whether the shutter sound has worked as intended, you need to understand the full scale of the problem it was designed to address, because the numbers are genuinely shocking. Voyeuristic photography in Japan is not a fringe issue. It's a documented, widespread, and devastatingly common crime that predominantly victimizes women and girls. Studies and police reports consistently show that the vast majority of victims are female, and that a significant proportion of perpetrators are men who by every other social measure appear entirely ordinary. Office workers, salarymen, school teachers. The crime does not fit a simple criminal profile, which is part of what makes it so difficult to address through social means alone. The problem became serious enough that Japan introduced major new legislation in July 2023, the Photography Crime Law. For the first time, voyeuristic photography was made a specific national crime offense with real teeth. Conviction can now result in up to 3 years in jail and a fine of up to 3 million yen, approximately £21,000. Distributing or sharing that material carries up to 5 years in prison. The law also covers attempting to film someone, not just successfully doing so, and applies to Japanese citizens even when traveling abroad. The fact that Japan felt the need to pass this specific law in 2023, more than 20 years after the shutter sound was introduced, tells you something important. The sound alone was never enough. It deterred casual opportunism. It did not stop people specifically intent on the crime. And so, 2 decades after phone manufacturers tried to solve a social problem with a technical fix, the government had to step in with actual criminal law to do what the click of a camera could not. Here's where the story becomes genuinely complicated, because the workarounds for the shutter sound are real, widely known, and sit in a legal and ethical grey area that Japan has not fully resolved. The most straightforward method is simply to use a foreign phone. Any smartphone purchased outside Japan and is not registered to a Japanese carrier retains its original settings, including the ability to shoot silently. International tourists who bring their own phones from home are using cameras that make no sound at all. The irony is unmistakable. The very people the shutter sound was designed to deter can circumvent it entirely just by virtue of having bought their device somewhere else. The second workaround is third-party camera applications. Because the shutter sound requirement exists at the level of the phone manufacturer and carrier, not at the operating system level, third-party camera apps downloaded from the App Store or Google Play are not bound by the same standard. Silent camera apps are freely and legally available in Japan. They are not hidden. They are listed openly in the app stores. Using one is not against the law. The manufacturer made their camera loud. A third-party developer made a different camera that's silent. And anyone who wants silent photography can simply use that instead. Several other methods circulate freely online. Covering the speaker with a finger muffles the sound significantly on some models. Recording a video and capturing a still frame produces a silent image. Using burst mode reduces the prominence of individual shutter sounds in a rapid sequence. None of these are illegal. All of them are freely discussed online, and the existence of every single one underlines the same fundamental point that critics have been making for over 2 decades. A rule that can be bypassed by anyone with 5 minutes and a Google search is not a serious solution to a serious problem. What the shutter sound actually does, its critics argue, is create the illusion of protection without delivering the substance. It stops casual, impulsive photography by people who are not particularly determined. It does absolutely nothing to stop someone who specifically intends to commit voyeurism and is prepared to spend 30 seconds downloading an app. The people it deters are, by definition, not the people it was designed for. The debate about whether Japan should keep the shutter sound is ongoing, increasingly vocal, and genuinely unresolved. The case for keeping it rests on deterrence, the argument that even imperfect protection is still better than none, and that the sound stops some incidents even if it doesn't stop all of them. It also rests on cultural signaling. The shutter sound tells every person in the vicinity that a photograph has been taken. That social transparency has real value beyond purely practical. In a society that places enormous weight on collective awareness and public order, the sound is not just a deterrent to the perpetrator, it's a notification to the victim and to bystanders. It makes photography visible in a way that silent photography fundamentally is not. The case against is equally compelling. The rule is inconsistently applied, trivially circumvented, and imposes a genuine inconvenience on millions of completely innocent users. Tourists photographing a quiet shrine, parents capturing a school performance without disrupting it, photographers working in a gallery. It punishes the many for the behavior of the few and creates a false sense of security that may actually reduce pressure to address the underlying problem through more effective means. And AI is now adding an entirely new dimension to this debate. Facial recognition technology has evolved to the point where a single photograph taken at a distance can identify an individual, track their location, and pull their personal data from social media, all without the subject having any idea it's happened. A shutter's sound does not protect against that. It does not protect against surveillance cameras, dashcams, smart doorbells, or any of the dozens of recording devices that now populate every public space. The privacy threat the shutter sound was invented to address has been dwarfed by threats it was never designed to see coming. One celebrity, one arrest, one boardroom decision. 25 years later, every phone sold in Japan still makes that sound, embedded so deeply into the culture that most Japanese people have never questioned it, and most tourists discover it only when they're already standing in a temple wondering why their silent phone just announced itself to an entire courtyard. It's a story about a real and serious problem, about a technical fix that was always imperfect, about the gap between the intention of a rule and its actual effect, and about a country still working out, in real time, how to protect people from crimes that technology makes easier every year. Were you caught out by this when you visited Japan? Did the sound annoy you, or did you understand why it was there? Let me know in the comments. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories about the Japan most channels never go near. See you in the next one.